Hello everyone, my name is Raphael. I'm going to present to you our research on studying who is using a specialized machine translation service for the Tetun language and what they're using it for. This was joint work carried by the University of Melbourne, myself under supervision from Ekaterina Vylomova, and Professor Hanna Suominen from the Australian National University, and Adérito Correia from the Timor-Leste Institute of National Linguistics. So we work with a language called Tetun. It's the most spoken language in Timor-Leste. Timor-Leste is a half-island country that shares a border with Indonesia. Tetun is interesting because it's low resource, but it's also institutional. So within Timor-Leste, it is an official language. It's used extensively in the streets, in the media, for education. And it's also standardized. So the Timor-Leste National Institute of Linguistics puts together an official standard spelling, which is not always well followed, but it's there anyways. And it is written to an extent. So there's around 40,000 Tetun documents that can be found in NLP corpora, which is not nothing, but which doesn't make it a high resource language either. Myself and a number of other volunteers, including Adérito, have put together a project called Tetun.org. It's like a specialized machine translation service for Tetun on one side and any of English or Indonesian or Portuguese. Until Google Translate added support for Tetun in June last year, it was the main machine translation service for the Tetun language. And to this day, it has around 80,000 monthly active users, which is significant for a country of 1.3 million people. And we are using data coming from this service to try to infer who is using this low-resource machine translation service and what they're doing with it. So these are research questions. Users of Tetun.org, who are they? What do they translate? And how does that compare to available training data? Now we work with a sample of server logs from this service. So on this service, inference is run on the server. And so users are sending a text to translate and a target language, and then the service is returning to them the empty text in the target language that they have requested. There's no user accounts, there's no logging of user IP or anything like that, but we can use this data. We went through an ethical application process, and the privacy policy and the about page of Tetun.org mentioned that this data can be used for research purposes. So it's naturally anonymized, meaning it's not associated with any particular user. And if we analyze it in the agglomerate, we can infer some interesting things like the domain, and maybe even try to infer some things about who the end users are. We get some Google Analytics data for the website and app analytics. We have apps deployed on the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store. And so both of these give us just agglomerate data on mostly countries, number of users by countries. And we do a comparison with available Tetun corpora from Hugging Face. MadLad is the largest Tetun corpus we could find, and it's the one we use for comparison. We run a domain analysis. So using the empty inputs, we want to infer the domain, and for this we use a framework from Saunders, which characterizes domain as three components: topic, provenance, and then genre. So the idea here is like topic would be text is about health, text is about history, text is about government affairs. Provenance is what kind of text this is coming from. So is this a textbook? Is this a news article? Is this an email between two people? The idea here is that you might have a news article about health and a research article about health, and these two are very separate, even though they might share the same topic. And genre, under genre, after consultation with the Timorese National Institute of Linguistics, we choose to analyze spelling standardization. So for topic and provenance, we'll have to come up with classes and classify all of the text into these classes. So initially we use LDA to identify our labels. So for example, for topics, there is the classes that you see here, and one text can be part of several topics. Provenance, though, is one class per document. And then we try to use a range of different models for topic and provenance inference. And we find that Llama 3.1 8 billion parameter that is run on the high resource side, so English or Indonesian or Portuguese, yields the highest result. when measured both by micro average F1 and weighted average F1. All right, so the results, number one, user base. So a lot of our users run the service on mobile devices. And that's very interesting because as researchers, we have a tendency to publish our models like on Hugging Face, which is quite accessible from desktop devices, but difficult to use from mobile devices. But if you have a model and you want people to use it, putting it inside of an application and putting that application on the Google Play Store is probably the best thing you can do for people to find your service. So for us, 75% of all users are on Android. And even within the website users, we actually have more website users on mobile than we do on desktop. And getting data from Google Analytics and the app stores, we find that the vast majority of our users are in Timor. So have their device registered in Timor. That's true for over 90% of Android users, and that's true for 3/4 of the website users. Now, who are these users? So we start to get a little bit of a clue from the time and days on which the website is most active. So we find that the evening is really the peak period usage of our service. And this is a time when office workers are not necessarily very active, but students are very active preparing their homework. So you can see here in Timor-Leste time, around 8, 9, 10 p.m., we have peaks of usage. And interestingly, we don't get a peak that is very high on Saturday night, but we do get a high peak on Sunday night. Why? Because the day after Sunday is a Monday, and so kids go back to school on Monday. But the day after Saturday is a Sunday, and kids don't have class on Sunday, and so they're not preparing their homework then. We have other elements that later we'll present that confirm that hypothesis that many of the users are students. Translation direction is also interesting here. We find that there is far more demand for translation from a high resource language to a low resource language than there is the other way around. And across all language pairs, the high resource to low resource is at least 2x higher demand than low resource to high resource. Doing topic classification, we find that a lot of topics that have relevance for education are in very high demand. So things like science and research, healthcare and medicine, education itself as a topic, these come very high. And typical topics that we encounter a lot in LoResMT, like religion, like news, are actually ranked much lower. And this comes in sharp difference with MATLAB, where in MATLAB, the majority of articles are news articles. And so they cover extensively government and social economic issues. So articles about, this politician said this, and there's a new law that will do that. These are useful as training corpus, but they don't really correspond to what user demand, where user demand is. And similarly for provenance, we find that over half of all of the documents that are passing through this service belong to education and research material. And MATLAB only has 7.5% of its documents belonging to this provenance. And meanwhile, news articles, correspond to more than 60% of the articles in MATLAB. So we really have a big mismatch between what people are translating, what people are actually using this service for, and the available NLP corpora. Under genre analysis, so we find that spelling is more standardized in MATLAB, but still, MATLAB, you have around 85% of all words that belong to the standardized Tetun spelling, versus in MT Tetun inputs, you only have around 70%. And so if you want a service that will be useful to a number of end users, you'll have to find a way to be more robust to misspellings than what you could find in available corpora. I think there is something very interesting at play here. That I present as the tragedy of LoResMT. So after looking at these results, I thought about myself, how I use MT, and I realized look, I grew up in France. I was educated in French, and this was the language I was speaking at home, at school, etc. And the moment when I started consuming significant amounts of content in English is when I started to learn programming. Because there was not a lot of programming content in French, at least at the time. And so it's precisely because there was not a lot of content available in French that I wanted to seek out this content in English, and when I didn't understand it, translate it from English to French. So that domain imbalance meant that there is more MT demand for these domains that are not well covered in available text. But at the same time, and there's research that shows that having a domain that has poor coverage in the available training data means less MT performance. So it's precisely the domains that are in highest demand from end users that are going to get the least MT performance. And this has a number of implications for us. The first one is that I think when we evaluate MT models, we need to stop evaluating on domains that are overrepresented in training data. It risks giving a very poor image of what will be the end user experience. And we're making large claims saying, we have a model that achieves a blue score of XX on this language, when really it's only achieving this score in the religious or the news domains that are overrepresented in our corpora. And focusing on education-related domains that have a high social impact and that seem to be of high demand makes a lot of sense. Number two, trying to focus on mobile. Like I said, trying to wrap models in mobile applications and publishing them on app stores is probably a good idea to make our models more useful to the greater number of people. And number three, focusing on translation from the high resource to the low resource direction. Even though it's often the harder direction, and you can see in research articles that sometimes it's overlooked, but it seems to be the more useful one. We have some limitations here. Number one, maybe the design of Tetun.org impacted usage. Maybe domains that Tetun.org performs well in means that it's used less for those domains. There's probably some noise in reported data. In particular, if people move countries, maybe they're considered as belonging to one country, but then it's not the case. And number three, we only work with one language, and I'm convinced that our results really only apply to Tetun. And you'd have to run a similar analysis for other languages. Thank you.